now. And I'll let everybody in.
Give it a 1 more minute, Julia. Give it 1 more minute.
Okay.
Oh, and Julia, you will advance the slides, right?
Yep.
And you can do it relatively quickly when I start introducing or say hello. You can slowly start transitioning to the next one. Don't wait for me to say next slide. You can do it as you go.
Yeah, don't give me a cue. I think it's right away.
No, you can do it yourself. You
Yep.
can judge it yourself.
Okay.
All righty.
Okay. I'll let everybody in there.
So hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to all of you to actually our first Executive Insights on Product session. My name is Raphael. I'm one of the co-founders of the Product Management Festival and related formats. And yeah, I'm very, very happy to welcome you here to this inaugural session. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about the Product Management Festival as such. So I'm sure many of you know it and have probably been there. But we do a couple of related formats. It's much more than a conference. I would say it's a community. And it's also a community of events and formats that we do. I'll just mention a few here. Trends and benchmarks. We've thousands and thousands of people download the Trends and Benchmark and contribute to it. This is basically setting the baseline on all things PM and PM best practices. We have local PM nights in 20 plus cities at this point. I've done many of those. We have product exec circles, which is specifically targeted to more senior folks like directors, VPs, CPOs, management teams. We've done many of those, and actually we see a lot of demand there. Of course, we have the conferences, and we have them in Zurich and Singapore, and have thousands of people who visited us or joined the community in those conferences over the last couple of years. And also we have an INSEAD program that we call Product Management Executive Program, which is running, I think, for the 5th time now with quite a large number of participants and very good feedback. I'm mentioning all of that to just show you that we have this mission to amplify product management and build a community of contributors there. But we also want to innovate in formats because this, different formats, different things work for different people. So this is why we're today doing this first inaugural session of the Executive Insights on Product. And specifically, if you go to the next slide, what you're going to see there is a specific angle, in this space, and it's basically targeting CPOs. Like we want to have, senior CPOs that actually are in the management teams of companies, or even folks that have made a transition from being a senior product lead to become a general manager. And just today's session is, I think, is a prime example of that, because we always hear, and again, this is about different formats, right? But in this format, in more senior formats, we often hear that there's still, something to learn there, both for general managers that, need to get used to work with PM leads and, understand really what product means and the culture and sort of power shifts that are related to that. But also for PM leads, I've personally seen folks, becoming sort of moving on from a function lead to becoming a general manager, and not always this goes flawlessly, right? So there are things to be learned there. So this is sort of the concept of the Executive Insights. Just quickly about me. I'm the most boring part today, but again, like I said, I'm the co-founder of the festival and designed many of those formats. I've been a senior director at Google for many years. I ran big parts of Google Maps and Google Shopping, which was a big business for Google. And I'm now essentially, I left Google at the beginning of the year, and I'm doing this more or less full time now. So this is sort of my love and my passion and my hobby. here, and it's a lot motivated, to be honest, to give back from what I learned, but also many great folks in the community that have been part of this journey. Speaking of which, I would love to introduce you Matt Glotzbach, who is our fabulous guest today. And I should mention, actually, we do have a thing in common, which is we met over many years, actually, in Zurich, where we both were, at Google on different products. And fun fact, he actually was my predecessor at the board seat of Google in the Product Management Festival. So there's a Google connection. So we're both ex-Googlers now, but I should mention this, that he actually did a lot of the early work at the PMF, but I think we haven't interacted in many years. So for me, this is also partially a new story. But interestingly, what is interesting about Matt is that he exactly made that transition. So even in Google, and I'll keep it just quick because we're going to touch on that in a minute. Even in Google already, he made this move from a VP of product to a GM. But I think that's maybe enough from me now. Let's dive right in. And yeah, welcome, Matt. Thank
you, Raphael. Great to be here.
And maybe I'll just exactly hand it over to you and say, Matt, who are you? And maybe talk a little bit about exactly that journey you had, maybe in Google and YouTube and where you are today.
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. Really excited to be here and speak to you all. I remember the first Product Management Festival conference in Zurich, and it was huge at the time, and I think it was maybe a few hundred people, and we were so excited with the large crowd that we got back in, I don't know when that was, 2013 maybe, something like that. And it's amazing to see the community grow the way it has. So really an honor to be with you. A little bit about me, as Raphael said, we had the opportunity to meet at Google. I actually served a long tenure at Google. I was there for 12 years. I started there in 2004 as a product manager in what at the time was the Google Enterprise Group. Now you would know it as, I guess, Google Cloud is sort of the predecessor. And this was, if you can think back to 2004, this was before software as a service was really a thing. And so the first product that we built in Enterprise was an enterprise search appliance. Yes, an actual piece of physical hardware that you took into your enterprise data center and deployed on your intranet to provide Google quality search across your intranet. And then from there, we built what is Google Workplace now. It changes names every 10 minutes or so, but G Suite Google Apps was the original name, of taking those consumer SaaS services of Gmail, and then we built out Calendar and Google Docs and all of those things, and packaging them together and taking them into businesses large and small, government, education, et cetera. So I did that for a number of years, and then in late 2010, we had grown that business, the enterprise business, fairly substantially, into being really $1 billion business, and it was continuing to scale. And I was ready for my next challenge, and that's right when Google was undergoing some broader organizational change. Larry had just become CEO, and I got the opportunity to work for Salar, who was running YouTube at the time. And it was a great transition for me because I didn't know anything about the video space, only had a limited amount of direct-to-consumer experience, didn't really know anything about the ad space. And so when I was offered that opportunity, I said, sure, that sounds great. I'm a perfect fit. But made that transition, and then quickly also actually moved to Europe and was based in Zurich, where I was leading the efforts in EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa for YouTube, and that's where I first got the opportunity to meet you, Raphael, as colleagues in the Zurich office. Then did that for a number of years, came back to the US, continued on a product leadership role, focusing on YouTube subscription businesses, what today is YouTube Premium, and also we were building YouTube TV for the market. And then got the opportunity, was happy with what I was doing, wasn't looking for a job, but someone reached out and told me about this small company called Quizlet, which I actually hadn't heard of. But I had always been interested in the intersection of technology and learning. And so as I learned more about the company, what I found was an amazing direct-to-consumer learning and study platform that despite its small team size, it was less than 30 people when I joined, had found amazing product market fit and was really starting to garner a very large audience. So when I joined Quizlet in early 2016, it was about like I said, 30 or so employees, was doing almost no revenue, a little bit of revenue, but had over 10 million monthly active users. That was all growing organically. And so eventually I decided it was a move I needed to make. I felt like the risk was not taking a chance and going and pursuing that. So jumped over to Quizlet, and where we are today, we're about 275 people, mostly still in the US, although we do have a small team that we're building in Europe. We now serve over 70 million monthly active users, have significantly grown the business and the revenue, and see nothing but great growth opportunities in front of us. So, and just a brief bit, if you have kids, you maybe know about Quizlet, or if you happen to be, just a few years out of university, maybe you've used Quizlet, but it's a study platform. It's all user-generated content. And what we do is we use machine learning to take that user-generated content and generate interactive study experiences. So we actually promote kind of active learning through the course of studying across any topic, any subject matter, given the UGC model of it. So let me pause there, and I'll hand it back over to you, Rafael.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, really an exciting journey, and I don't have any real information about Quizlet, but what I'm seeing from the outside, it sounds like a very fast-growing business, and probably a good move for you. So if we now focus maybe for a moment on this specific element of, senior product leads to general manager, and maybe let's go back to the YouTube times, because I personally even specifically remember that one day you were called the GM of YouTube Europe, I think something like that. I'd be curious to maybe if you could describe that piece first a bit, and kind of what motivated you to do it, what did it actually mean? What did it mean for you? What did it mean for the company? What has changed for you when you kind of made that move?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's interesting reflecting on that. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about this. I actually think it's a really natural evolution of the product role. So for me, the situation at YouTube was as Google moved from a functionally aligned organization, and then with a geographic set of functions. So for example, in EMEA, there was a senior executive that was responsible for all of engineering, for all of product, et cetera. And then the organization rolled up to them. And effectively, Google transitioned to more of a business unit type model, where so YouTube was a business unit and ads was a business unit, et cetera. And so, the opportunity that I had was still in technically a product role. So I was the product lead, but also kind of having this hybrid type, somewhat ill-defined role of but also kind of run Europe, make sure that everything's kind of going in the right direction and that we've got the right strategy, and kind of, so I got to sit on the Salar, the CEO of YouTube at the time, now Susan Wojcicki, sit on his staff with kind of accountability over Europe, while also still having some, what you all might view as some traditional product management responsibilities. And I think that was a fairly natural transition, because, if we really strip down the essence of the product management role, a lot of debate about the right kind of framing of the model, but I do think of it as you're in a lot of ways, you're the general manager of your product. It's your job to make sure that your product is successful, no matter what boundary, whatever success means for the product. So obviously a core part of that is defining, the right product functionality and working with the development team or the engineering team or whatever the case may be to deliver that. But it really, a successful product manager, it's really more than that. It's whatever needs to be done and whatever the barriers are. The other thing that I feel like I've always been lucky in my product management career is I've always been, I'll say forced, but I've always been aware of or forced to understand the P&L, for lack of a better term, but simply put, the business case of the product of okay, at the heart of it, your product is part of some may be a consumerification, et cetera, but it sits in some context that I've had. I've been required to understand my products in that larger business. And that may seem really obvious, but as Raphael will tell you at Google, where Google is massive and has an amazing revenue generating business in the ads world, it wasn't always the case that product managers kind of understood or were asked to or expected to understand the P&L. Go ask the average product manager, well, how's your product make money? How's it contribute to the business? And a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know. They're like, oh, no, my job isn't to make money. My job is to get more users. Okay, well, why, right? And so I digress. But but I've always been fortunate in my roles to have a little bit of that broader sort of sense of how does this fit into the bigger picture. And so that transition to almost formalizing that general management was very familiar. What it meant in specificity was I had reporting responsibility for the product management group in Europe. I didn't have reporting responsibility for engineering, but I had an engineering colleague that sort of a dotted line. It was an influence role, right? Maybe that's a great way to mention it. It's like in product, one of the things I'm sure you've all heard is you have accountability, but no authority, right? None of the people that you need to be successful actually report to you. And that's actually true. It's not technically true in general management roles but what I've learned as I've progressed in my career is even when people report to you and so you technically have authority, the way to lead them and to be really successful is to influence them more so than, you don't just order them what to do. So anyway, I think that it was a very natural sort of evolution of a more traditional product role into this general management role. And ultimately, when I finished my tenure in that role, I actually had the business development and content organization reporting to me, and the marketing organization reporting to me. Engineering and sales were still dotted line, but it did morph a little into more of a traditional, what a normal company would call a traditional GM role.
And maybe one final one before we move to Quizlet, which is again another probably the interesting transition. The final one on YouTube. How, if at all, did your time allocation and your calendar, your habits, your routines, did any of that change with that specific move?
Absolutely, definitely. I'd say as I think back on in my product role, there were really two primary, areas of focus. And broadly put, it was external, internal, right? And external was understanding my customer, my user, whoever was using my product. So at YouTube, for a number of years, I was responsible for the creator-facing sets of products and functionality on YouTube. And so I actually spent a bunch of my time understanding that user base, right? And that's everything from, reading things to watching, YouTube, watching videos about creators, talking to individual creators, talking to groups, but it was all about the more look. One of the things that was most difficult when I transitioned into that role at YouTube is, look at me, I'm not a YouTube creator. Like I'm not the stereotype or the prototypical YouTuber. And so I really had to immerse myself in that world to understand understand my customer, understand my user, understand what they needed. And so I spent a great deal of my time doing that. And then internally, the job of how do I take that understanding and translate it into a product plan, right? How do I work with my designers, my engineers, my analysts, et cetera, to take that and really formulate a plan and then ultimately deliver on that plan. And so that's, in a nutshell, oversimplified, but that was how I spent my time as a product person, with of course internal meetings and all that good stuff. But as I moved to kind of more of a general management role, that was still a piece of it, but there were these other facets of, I had to understand the marketing world and the go-to-market and how, the kinds of marketing programs we were running outside of just the creator community, obviously the broader consumer community, the advertiser community. the entire world of advertising sales was new to me, really. And so I spent a lot of time with our sales organization based out of London, predominantly understanding advertisers. And the interesting part there was video advertising was also new to Google. And so we were sort of, in some ways, we were learning together about the space. And so there was that whole additional dimension. And then on the content side, although I understood the creator side really well, I tended to focus more of my time and energy on kind of the individual creators, the smaller, kind of small, medium YouTube stars, those types of folks, not as much with the professional studios and the professional creators. And so I had to shift my focus there too. So I found my time very dispersed, right, across a number of things. And I'd say the biggest challenge there was figuring out where the best use of my time was, right? The limiting factor was the number of hours in a day. And so figuring out how to allocate my time and what was gonna provide the highest ROI of that time investment. And it was tricky because you're always wondering, like, am I working on the right things? I didn't have anybody to tell me, go do that, go do that, go do that. And so definitely was a bit of a trial and error and getting comfortable and iterating into that.
And I remember that in a similar, maybe not quite as broadly, but maybe relatable, when I took on my shopping leadership role, because it was a huge business for Google. It was a multi-billion-dollar business. You are automatically forced to go more outside, worry about customer problems and all of that. And yes, I know exactly this feeling of fragmentation, and nobody can tell you whether you're actually allocating your time and your energy, right? I mean, time and energy, right, or even two different things.
Absolutely.
Anyways, but it sounded like you had a conscious, from at least what I'm hearing, it sounded to me like you had a conscious approach to it, which might already be an interesting thing for our audience, just to realize that this is a different beast potentially, right? So talking about different beasts, now you kind of got this offer to go to Quizlet. I know there's probably a very young founder, from what I know, when you kind of came in. Maybe talk about that journey, which is probably yet another step, and actually probably in some dimensions more challenging, in some dimensions because it's a smaller team. I could imagine also like smaller complexity. So talk about that and what you learned there, what surprised you.
Yeah, it's interesting. As I reflected on that transition, the way I would say is the things that were difficult or more difficult at Google were actually a lot easier at Quizlet, right? When you can literally get the entire company around a table, it's easy to make decisions and you can move really fast. There's not a lot of consensus building, bureaucracy and whatnot. And so, it was easy to move fast. It was easy to make decisions. It was easy to, turn quickly and go in a different direction. But all the things that I realized over the years that I worked at Google, that all of those support structures and infrastructure and things that made a bunch of things at Google very easy were extremely hard. And so, recruiting and at Quizlet, we had one person and she was amazing, but, so it was sort of the easy things were easier at Quizlet. Of really trying to be deliberate about what you spend your time on and what you invest your time in. And then one of the things that I learned actually from one of our other colleagues, Shishir Mehrotra, who was a product VP at YouTube, was also being intentional about your time management of like, here's where I want to spend my time, and then going back after the fact and auditing it and say, did I spend my time this week where I wanted to, right? Did I have a plan at the beginning of the week for what I wanted to accomplish? And then, on Friday afternoon or Saturday morning, going and looking at your calendar and literally saying, okay, how much time did I spend in one-on-ones? How much time did I spend outside talking to customers, et cetera, et cetera. So the transition to Quizlet, I'd say one of the most surprising things was I did learn at Google, as you grow in seniority in your role, your voice carries more, right? Your voice is louder. And so that's both very powerful, but you have to use that very carefully and very intentionally. So I'll tell you an anecdote. I had been at the company for maybe 2 weeks. I think it was like my second week at Quizlet, and I was sitting in a meeting where we were talking about some new product thing that the team was building. And I made an offhand comment. I said, oh, well, hey, you thought about like maybe it should work like that, right? But what did I know, right? I hadn't done any of the user research. I was new to the space, et cetera. But I just, intuition said, oh, maybe it should work like that. And somebody came, an engineer, still at the company today, is amazing data scientist now, came and said, like 2 hours later, said, hey, we implemented that change you asked for. And I didn't even know what he was talking about. I said, what change? What are you talking about, Shane? And he said, oh, that change that you said in the meeting that we should do it this way. We did that. It's live now. Wait, I don't know if that's a good idea or not. Like, did you test it with anyone? Can we run an A/B test? Like, what, hey. And so that was a great lesson early on, that you have to be really cognizant, no matter how big or small the organization, right? I felt like I was just sitting around a table with some teammates, brainstorming a problem. They saw me as the CEO that had just come in from, an executive from YouTube, which they obviously held in high regard, the company, and that if I said something, then they were going to go make it so. And so it was a really important early lesson for me of be really thoughtful about how to use your voice, where to use your voice.
And what you're mentioning here is exactly one of the, if I go back to the question of, transition and PM versus general manager, that's exactly maybe one of the fallacies, because of course, as a PM, like if you take the PM part of your brain, you immediately have reactions, but as executive, maybe you have to learn that it's interpreted very differently, right? It's not taken as an idea. So super interesting. Keep going with those. I think these are really interesting examples.
No, that's exactly right. And I think it's, people. I would love, there've been companies, and maybe some of you work at organizations where you don't have titles, and you try and sort of leave titles at the door, et cetera. And I love that in concept, in theory. I can tell you all the other reasons why that doesn't work, because we as humans want to see progression, and we want to know we're moving forward both in our career, et cetera. So like there's challenges with that, but conceptually, I love the model of, when everybody walks into a room to have a discussion, have a debate, brainstorm, they leave their titles and their role and responsibility at the door, and everybody's voice is equal, and, and there's a process. But the reality is it's not like that, right? I saw this at Google as well. When I got promoted to VP, the same thing happened, still within product management. So it's not a, product to GM move necessarily, but I think just more of a seniority move of, literally I was the same person, the day before and the day after, but people treated me differently in meetings the next day. And it kind of annoyed me. I was like, hey, come on, it's just me. Like I didn't change last night. I happened to get a nice promotion, but I didn't change. So, I'd say, the other thing that was most challenging for me as I made that kind of formal transition, right, from product executive at Google to CEO at Quizlet, was this kind of this accountability for everything, which is in my product role, I had exposure to and visibility to, to HR, to hiring, to finance. I worked with the finance team on our plan, et cetera. So I had exposure to all those things. I had exposure to marketing, et cetera. And I felt like I knew them really well. The minute I stepped into the role at Quizlet, again, even though much smaller, like the organization that I left at YouTube was 250, 300 people, and I went to a 30-person, company. So even though much smaller, I suddenly had full accountability for all of those things. So it went from being kind of a participant or an observer to like, oh, now you're you're in charge, you make the call. Or you're responsible for the call that the person on your team that owns that function made. And that was it took some time to get used to that transition and build up the confidence, I'm not the expert in finance. I'm not the expert in design. I've got great people on my team who are, and I trust them, and we've built up that trust, and I've built enough familiarity in those disciplines that I can be effective at, knowing when to push them versus knowing when to, just say, yeah, whatever you think is best, et cetera. But that was for me, that was a really formative transition and somewhat unsettling, right? I mean, that first 6-month transition time I woke up in the middle of the night many times going, God, I have no idea if the financial plan is right or not, right? I've never been accountable for it before. And I've got a great finance guy, his name was Derek at the time. I've got a great finance guy in Derek, but I don't know if it's, I don't know if we're doing the right thing. And so I think that's another piece of that transition. Although a lot of it is natural, there are some step function aspects to it that you just have to, kind of sit with and get comfortable with.
Mm-hmm. If you were to do it again, like those two transitions, and if you maybe zoom out, if you maybe had advice for your younger self, and of course also advice to our audience, right? And some of which might at some point in their careers make that step. What are some, things you would maybe do differently or pay more attention to, try to avoid?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of people, there's a few things I guess I'd highlight. And this is probably not specific to any, it's not necessarily specific to product management, although that's where I've spent the majority of my career, so highly influenced by that. A lot of people ask the question of, okay, hey, I want to be a VP, I want to be a CEO, I want to be a senior exec. How do I get there? What's the path? And my honest and fairly candid advice is, don't worry too much about the job you want. Be great at the job you have. And that may sound overly simplistic and a bit of a platitude, but for me in my career, technically this is my third job. I moved around a couple times within Google, so maybe you could call it my fourth job. But I've been doing this for over 25 years now, and this is my third job or third company. And so I really focused on the work at hand. And it doesn't mean that I didn't think about the future. And if anything, I'd probably tell my younger self to think a little bit less about the next promotion, the next title, the next change, because where my learning and where my growth and where my success came from was being really, really differentially good at the job I was doing. And that's what created the next opportunity. Now, yes, there are corner cases where maybe you've got a horrible manager or a horrible boss or executive that you do, of course. I'm not saying you shouldn't advocate for yourself, but I think that I see a trend that I'm not a big fan of, which is people are trying to architect out, okay, I'm going to do this for 18 months, and then I'm going to make this move, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to, and then I'll stay at this company for 2 years and make this jump so I can get this promotion. And that's well-intentioned, and I get that, but the way that I think, you create the next opportunity is being amazing at the current opportunity and having everyone see that you're over-delivering on that opportunity and you're differentially good at it. And then the people around you want you to take on more, right? They say, wow, she's amazing. How can we're underutilizing her. Look at how well she's doing at this job. Let's give her more responsibility, et cetera. There's a guy that you all may have, he's in the education, he's unfortunately passed away, but he was in the education field, but you probably would know him from his TED Talk. His name is Sir Ken Robinson, one of the most famous TED Talks on education. He, later in his career and in his life, he wrote a book around, finding your purpose. And something he said, which has really stuck with me, is that when we all look back on our career, we can tell a really well-crafted narrative of, well, I did this for 3 years, and then I decided to move here, and then I decided to move here. But it's rare that we actually have that clarity and foresight when we're in the moment. Now, a very few people do. There are people who say, I'm going to be a physician. I know I want to, do heart surgery from when they were age 8, and they work to get there, and then they do that, et cetera. But that's the exception. We all, are good at looking back and telling a story about how we architected our path to the present. But the reality when we're in it is very, very messy and very chaotic and not nearly that planful. So bottom line, I would say first piece of advice would be great at the job you're in and do a really, really good job, differentially good at what you're doing today, because that is what will be the springboard for creating kind of the next opportunity. The second piece, and I think it's related as you're thinking about the types of jobs you want to do. And this is particularly important as you think about this transition from, you know, product management to product leadership to general management or general leadership. I always recommend when people are thinking about a career change or a job change, I said, envision what your average Tuesday is going to look like. And people kind of always look at me a little sideways and say, no, okay, think about it. Like imagine yourself a month from now in this new role, in this new job. What's your role going to look like on a Tuesday? And Tuesday, you know, pick any day of the week, but I pick Tuesday. You know, what kind of people are you going to be working with and meeting with? What are the projects that you're going to be working on? What are the tasks? What are the meetings that you're going to have to go to or be asked to go to? Who are the customers that you're going to be meeting? Like, what's that look like? Because that's really the core of what's going to shape your happiness in the role, your growth, your learning. And it's when we're thinking about the next step, it's really easy to think about the title. You know, for longest, I spent longer than I'd care to admit in the director level at Google. And there were some of those years where I was really worried about if I was going to make the next level of getting promoted or not. And if I could go back and tell my younger self, like, don't worry as much about that. You know, think about the role and the job and what an average Tuesday looks like, because that's really the core of forming kind of your happiness. It's whether you're going to be excited and satisfied in the role. And it's not to say that title and compensation don't matter. Obviously they do. I don't want to downplay those. But when it actually comes to your day-to-day happiness and the growth and the learning that you're going to have, it's that what's your average Tuesday is going to really shape that. And I think this is something that as product people in particular, I don't know what it is about us, but we're maybe it's trained into us or it's how we're wired, but we always think about what the next progression, you know, okay, so I'm gonna go from this to this to this. Well, and that's fine, but the reality is, like, I don't get to do much of any product stuff anymore, right? Like, I love product. I love shaping products. I love brainstorming with my engineering and design colleagues. I love that. But I don't do much of that anymore. And I'm comfortable with that. It's a decision I made, and I like the role I have. But if you really love doing that facet of product, but you aspire to a general management and executive role, et cetera, just understand that your day-to-day is going to shift dramatically. Yeah. Talking to I won't say who, talking to another very successful senior exec at Google that Raphael and I both know. And he was lamenting to me, he said, you know, my next role, I want to work on a 10-person team and lead the product. And this guy runs, you know, an org of thousands of people now. But he misses that core product experience because that's what he loves. So bottom line on that is just really think about what motivates you and the kind of work you love to do, and let that, you know, use that to help guide kind of the roles that you're building towards.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, and I can relate so much to that. I think you always win something and you always lose something, but it's not like with grades, right? Where it's obvious that the next step is better, or, you know, you think more money is better, but there are actually true trade-offs. And I can personally say my last years at Google were clearly not my happiest, and there was a sweet spot for me, and this is the reason why I left. But anyways, well, and I'm gonna.
But before we go on, I do want to emphasize, to your point, it's not better or worse. I'm not making any value judgment there. Yeah. You aren't either. But it's very personal, right? Like, I'm, you know, I love the context switching that I do in this job. Like, you know, on any given day, if you look at my calendar, I cover a wide variety of things, including product, right? I'll probably spend, look at my calendar here, I'll spend, you know, somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes in product related conversations today, but I'll also be in, you know, international growth conversation. I've got a marketing conversation. I've got, you know, a meeting with an external party about something else, you know, et cetera. So, like, I love that context switching and the nature of that. So it's not that one is better or worse. It's more, you know, be very aware of what you enjoy, where you get your energy. as you're thinking about, kind of roles and progression.
Yeah. No, very well said. I love that. So we're going to open up for Q&A in a moment. And the way we're going to do that is I would love you to just chat your question in the chat, put it there, and I'm going to call out folks. And then if I call you out, please state your question live. So I'll moderate a bit, but I'm not going to read it. But I have a final question. But so start thinking, please, about questions, folks. I have a final one that is, I'm curious what you're going to say to that, because it's something I'm facing right now quite a bit, because I'm sort of dealing with a lot of companies now, a lot of execs, a lot of PM folks. So basically, I'm wandering different worlds now because I'm much less focused on one project, and I run into something over and over, which is some sort of let's say different language and potential misunderstandings between PM leads and business folks. And I'm talking specifically traditional business folks. I'm not talking about PMs that made it to business, right? I'm talking now about, boards, investors, partners, basically people that haven't been socialized in a PM heavy context. And I always found it fascinating to see, how those folks from those sides can actually converge and actually, and often you need two people to converge, two people that, understand each other. But I've also seen complete disconnects, even of senior people talking past each other and not getting it, right? Either way, I just wonder whether you have seen it as well, whether you experienced some of that, and whether you have any thoughts, on that interfacing of, different worlds, but in an
absolutely. It reminds me of many of you probably seen the American movie Office Space, where the person says, "So what exactly do you do?" And he says, "I take the reports and I move them from here to here." And that's if you know that scene, that's probably how some business executives think about product. They're like, "Well, I don't understand exactly what you do. Like, I understand the engineers build the functionality, and the marketers market it, and the salespeople sell it. Like, what do you do?"
Yeah.
And so I think, the first thing I would say is, there's really three points here. Number one is start by listening, start by understanding where that other party is coming from. Like, they have some preconceived notion, maybe not positive, maybe they've had some interactions with somebody in a product type role that they haven't liked, et cetera. And so the first thing is you've got to understand where they're coming from, so that you can, can meet them where they are, to your point on convergence, so that you can meet them where they are and help change that perception. So that would be the first one, is really actively listen and try and understand what they see and what their prior history is, if any, right? Then the second one is, educate them, try to educate them, but in a language, in a way that's going to resonate with them, right? Based on that prior experience, et cetera. So, you can't, it's easy for us to, as product people, to slip into sort of product jargon and talking about interfacing with customers and requirements and working with engineers and running sprints and, being agile scrum masters and all of those things. But, they're not going to understand any of that. You're literally going to sound like you're speaking Swiss German to them when they speak English, right? And so you need to sort of communicate to them in a language that they're going to understand. So really try and modulate or take your communication and meet them where they are. And then the third piece is, it's related to the second, but it's use examples. Like, tell stories, right? Stories are an amazing way to get a point across. And it doesn't have, the ideal story is one that will resonate with them from their industry, but it can be stories that they would be familiar with. And I would caution you against, for whatever reason, every product person always wants to tell a Steve Jobs story. Like, don't tell a Steve Jobs story, right? He's a mythical creature now that everybody has. Like, tell a story about a real world place where, the product person's role. I love this framing. I forget who told it to me, but I've been repeating it for years now, probably decades. Is there's an art and a science to product management, and the science is actually it's teachable, right? It's all of the, how do you gather requirements, how do you write a good user story, how do you run a scrum, how do you plan a sprint, like. That's the sort of project and program management of product. And that's a teachable thing. And people can actually get their head around that, right? When you talk to a business executive, they're like, "Oh, you're a project manager." I'm like, not quite, right? The art is in the universe of the thousands of things, of features you could go build for your product. What are the one or two that you actually should go build, right? Because the vast majority of products don't need 10 more features. They probably need 5 less features, and they need one feature that's really refined to meet the customers or the user's needs. And so the more that you can embody that idea in some story that will resonate with that executive, maybe it's about the industry that they're familiar with, maybe it's about a product that they've used, and you can talk about how, well, it's actually the role of the product manager to understand what that user need really was, and not just implement the 4 features that the user said they wanted, but really understand what they were trying to accomplish and then do that, right? So that would be my—
Yeah, perfect. I love it.
Again, it's a little bit abstract, but it really is about like
It's exactly what you do with users as well, right? You have to have empathy, and you have to see that you kind of find a common ground to operate on. No, I found this super useful and helpful. All right, I think we have 2 great questions. Please keep them coming. So I'll pick Kirsten first. So Kirsten, if you don't mind, and just kind of speak up and ask a question first. And it's an interesting one about time horizons. So please, Kirsten.
Hi. So my question is to our host. As you move into a more general management path from a product management leadership path, do you find that your time horizon is shifting significantly? Are you now looking at a multi-year, multi-decade kind of horizon compared to in product when it can often be a year, a couple of years? And which do you prefer?
Yeah, I'll give my answer, and I'd encourage Raphael to share yours as well. So I actually don't think that anything in software technology, I'll say, different industries, I think time horizons vary significantly. My father spent his entire career in the automotive industry, where, if you had a great idea for how to build a car, right, to physically produce and deliver a car. So I think that anything more than about 3 years isn't a highly relevant conversation, because it's too abstract and too much can change. So my view is, as a product manager, I feel like I was often in, this sprint, this month, this quarter, this year, and that was sort of this year was kind of my longer term horizon. As a executive, it's that, and I look out to the 3-year horizon. A lot of my job is to make sure that we've got the right people and the right plans in place to execute this year, and then let that go, and that runs itself, so to speak, with a little bit of intervention, and then really to think about, well, where are we going 2 and 3 years from now, about predicting industry trends, et cetera. On the second part of your question of like, which do I prefer? It depends on the day, candidly. Like, there are days when I love thinking about like what's going to happen 2 to 3 years from now, and how do we think about positioning there, et cetera. And that can be really fun and inspiring. And you spend a lot of time outside thinking about reading, talking to other experts, et cetera, and kind of thinking about what might happen. And there's an aspect that's satisfying to that. But there's also an aspect of the short term that's very satisfying, because you can see short-term delivery and results. Like, what are we going to do this quarter, for Quizlet? Okay, we delivered that, and we can see the results. And there's also something really satisfying about that. So I'm kind of not answering your question, because for me, it's actually a little bit of both. I like the blend again, right? I like the not always being just near-term focused and kind of in the weeds. I like to zoom out, but sometimes, thinking ethereally about what might happen, especially over the last 18 months with the pandemic, that's terrifying. And so sometimes it's comforting to go more, more near-term and more local.
Love it. Satish, you have a question about doing things differently and experiences on the specifically first 6 months. Do you want to kind of quickly talk in person?
Yeah, I'll just give a quick voiceover on that. Thanks for that good chat. So Pat, if you look back at the first 6 months of a new role, is there anything that you'd have done differently to sort of build that familiarity with your team, to sort of learn the ropes of what is it that your team members will be working on in finance or marketing or in sales, when you didn't have as deep an exposure to that before this?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one I've asked myself many times. there's a great book that I've read now 2 or 3 times, and it's called, I think it's just called like The First 100 Days, and it's basically about when you make a career transition. It's literally like a guidebook on here's what you should do, and the bottom line, or the TLDR of it, is really about coming in and listening. And so I really tried to take that to heart when I came into Quizlet. I said, okay, I'm not gonna make any, I'm not gonna change anything. I unintentionally made a feature request on week 2, but I'm not gonna change anything. I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna listen. And that was the plan. And I had a whole 30, 60, 90-day plan of what I was gonna do when, et cetera. Ironically, in my goal of listening, I was too focused on the theory of listening, and I wasn't actually listening. And so what I missed was the team was craving direction. The team was actually doing great things, executing really well, had good plans, but they didn't have much. Ironically, they didn't have much of a product management culture. They had some great product. They had 2 great product managers, but neither of them had ever really worked in a more formal product organization. So they didn't have, they were sort of making up as they go, and they were doing a fabulous job at it. But as a result, they didn't have a ton of confidence in kind of their approach and the way they were doing things, et cetera. And so the team was really craving like somebody to tell them, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. Not dictate per se, but to provide that structure. And with my mindset of I'm going to not apply anything, I didn't want to come in heavy-handed. I wanted to listen. I was really resistant on providing any of that. And so somebody pulled me aside. One of the senior engineers pulled me aside. It was probably 4 weeks in or so, and said, hey, when are you going you go to all the meetings and, but you're like, we want you to do something. We want you to tell us what to do. And he wasn't, it was in a great, feedback is a gift. It was in a great way, not in a critical way, but like he was saying, hey, come on, we need you to step up. Like everyone's been excited about your arrival. And now you've been here a month and like, you haven't really told us what to do or what's going to change or how it, and so it was that, so my mind was in the right place. Like my intention was well, which is I'm going to listen. I'm not going to upset the apple cart, but I almost took that too far, which is I wasn't hearing what the team was saying and needing. And so I actually took that feedback and adjusted. And so the moral of that story isn't, don't come in and, come into a new role and make change as quick as possible, but it's actually to really, truly listen and understand what the organization wants and needs and what they're asking for. The other thing I would say, and I don't know if this is possible to actually, if I had to do it again, I don't know if I would learn this lesson or not, but to the question or to the anecdote earlier about, finance and marketing and sort of different functions that I wasn't as comfortable with, it felt like this existential threat. Like it felt like if I screwed this up, everything was going to implode and the world was going to end. And the reality was that wasn't the case, right? In fact, I credit one of my board members who, I called him one night and said, Mark, we were working on the financial plan, and I felt like it was all turned upside down. I was like, Mark, help me here. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I was kind of in a panic, right? And he was amazingly gracious and generous and sort of talked me off the ledge. And he's like, okay, he literally started with, he's like, okay, assume all these numbers are completely wrong. What's going to happen? I was like, well, we'll probably keep doing what we're doing and we'll be fine. And we've got enough money in the bank. And so he, helped me understand that, like, hey, take a deep breath. You can figure this out. Lots of people have done this before. You'll get there. Don't take it all. It's important. I'm not suggesting to blow it off, but don't take seriously that you're literally you, and they'll help you, right? Everybody needs people to help them learn. So that would be the to just be very open about what I knew and what I didn't know, be vulnerable to some extent of like, hey, I don't know what I'm doing here. Anybody help me? And both internally, but also externally to, there's such a huge network. Well, this community is such a great example, right? You're all there to help one another. And you wouldn't think twice about asking one another for, or you shouldn't think twice about asking one another for that advice and that help. And that's an important lesson that I learned in definitely my first 6 months at Quizlet.
Thank you. I think,
Awesome. That's super helpful.
thank you. This is a great question, by the way. And I treat this as sort of I think it's called first 90 days.
Yeah.
I actually recommend it or gift. And the reason is, and I would really recommend it to everyone in a transition period. The reason is I think it's, for me, it was very surprising. I've seen many career transitions, obviously, over the years, is that some people treat this as sort of a passive thing that happens to them. Less so with seniors, because seniors, I mean, tend to know about leadership and, you know, negotiate a job profile and all of that. But especially, it's like a bit like career development, right? Nobody will take care of your career other than yourself. I think it's almost in a compressed way. The same thing happens when you start a new. There's this famous saying of there's only one chance to make a first impression, and away from it is it helps to structure this sort of onboarding phase, and you have a conscious approach to, you know, going through it, right? And it has definitely elements of listening. It has elements of quick wins. It has elements of finding allies, identifying resistance. So basically smoothening, you know, the onboarding and making it so it you know, it just doesn't randomly fall into place, but you actually steer it in a way that you want it to happen, right? So anyways, that's sort of a closing thought for me. Hey, Matt, I wanna thank you. So the book, sorry, somebody asked 90 days.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Matt, I wanna thank you so much. This was wonderful. I loved everything. I loved every minute of it. Please remain a friend of the Product Management Festival. Maybe we can have you back at some point. I love this. Thanks everyone for coming. And maybe as a final note, we're gonna have a second episode of this one in October before the conference. The conference is in November. And from actually, she started in Farfetch and has moved on to several GM positions afterwards. She's based in London. And yeah, I'm also very much looking forward to this one. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone. And have a great day. Stay safe.
Thank you so much.
See you next time.